excited to be here with my friends, Yael Kabili and Mikhail Oran from, well, Yael is from Kabili & Co. law firm, and she's also the co-founder of Fortinet. And then we have Mikhail, who is the co-founder of Fortinet. And we are going to talk today, both of these companies, they're incredible companies and they've done really great things for e-commerce sellers. And we are so proud at the Mexico trip and Evo Latam to have them represented, both companies represented at both events. So today we decided to get together and give you guys some great information, some considerations for sourcing, some considerations for your business when it comes to protecting your intellectual property, when it comes to sourcing and selling between countries, excuse me. And then also today, we're going to talk a little bit about some considerations for building assets in your business to make it even more sellable. So you might not think of your supply chain as an asset, but we're going to give you some examples like this to show you how you can make your company even more valuable when you're thinking about sourcing and diversifying your supply chain. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Yael to give us a little introduction and tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for having us, and super excited to go to Mexico. Can't wait. I'm Yael Kabili. I'm a friend of Amy. I'm a founder of the law firm Kabili & Co., which helps sellers on the legal side. So that includes intellectual property, trademarks, copyrights, patents, but also suspensions and any legal issue related to Amazon. I'm also co-founder of Fortinet together with Michal. Michal, do you want to present yourself?
Yeah, if it's my turn now. Michal Oran. I'm, as Yael mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Fortinet and the CEO of Fortinet. Originally, I'm a lawyer too. I served as a lawyer for 25 years, mostly commercial and corporate law. I dealt a lot with M&A transaction all in different places in the world, larger transactions than those existing today at the e-commerce space. By the end of 2018, Yael and I have decided to incorporate Fortinet as we understood that there is a need out there in the market for sellers and other e-commerce business owners to get a thorough representation with respect to the sale of their businesses. So we kind of imported into the e-commerce space the investment banking service, which is an end-to-end service, which is related to the sale of your business, partially or fully. And that's it. Here we are.
Amazing. Well, I love to hear both of your backgrounds because you cover really the full spectrum of legal aspects when it comes to, really cradle to grave of running a business. And these kinds of things come up constantly. I mean, Yael, you mentioned suspensions, and I was messaging you from the last Mexico trip because naturally we have those e-commerce seller discussions. Not only on the Mexico trip do we cover how to source from Mexico and legal aspects and all those things that you should think about, how to do business, their culture, all those things. We do factory tours, but we also cover some e-commerce topics, and we do that at Evo Latam as well. We have one day educating on e-commerce and one day educating on sourcing and business in Latin America. So it's interesting how really the full gamut always comes out. It's not just one thing we have to focus on. So speaking of legal, let's talk about intellectual property for a second and how important it is. When we're sourcing from countries like China, which are more common, we do think about protecting our intellectual property, our trademark in both China and America or wherever else we're selling. what are the considerations for Latin America? You know, if you're selling in Latin America, if you're selling in the US, like what kind of things should you be thinking about when it comes to trademarking and intellectual property?
Yeah. So I'll tell you generally about IP and trademark. I think that every seller must always register a trademark, or they sell the business, well, or they sell the products, and where they manufacture. So if you manufacture in China, you want to protect it in China. If you manufacture in Mexico and China, you want in both. There's another component to that. We're in, I don't know if you knew, but in 2005, I think it was, we saw many kind of hijackers doing kind of hijacking domain names and taking over the domain name in China. So they would steal amazingathome.cn, and then they would send you an email. Hi, we're a law firm. We heard that somebody stole amazingathome.cn. Do you want to buy it? Do you want to fight it or something like that? Then we saw 10 years later, the same thing happening within trademarks for Amazon sellers. They got emails. We heard about someone who registered your trademark in China. That means that they can actually prevent you from sending the goods and passing the customs at China to the US. And so these are kind of the new hijackers. And I'm sure it's going to get to Mexico and any other countries, where you manufacture. So I think that what you have to think about, one is you want to protect yourself there first, because you don't want anybody to steal it from you and to take it from you or prevent you from using your own trademark. And second, you want your own protection so that you can prevent others from using your brand there. So if you're manufacturing in Mexico, maybe not on the first day. Once you really see it's consistent and you're going to stay there, I would definitely apply the cost or nothing compared to the cost where things go wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we were talking about this a little bit before I hit the go live button, but we were talking about how we get that question all the time. People say, do I have to worry about my supplier in Mexico stealing my ideas? And I know we haven't talked about patents yet, but intellectual property in general, do I have to worry about my supplier in Mexico? And Mexico is not where China is, right? There's not as many opportunists because most suppliers in Mexico are not even selling in e-commerce yet.
Yeah.
So they're curious about it. They're wanting to learn more. They want to work with e-commerce buyers, but they're not where China is. So there's not as many opportunists, right? When it comes to, the full out scams where they're sending you these emails and trying to get you to protect something that they just set up themselves, right? Yeah. But in general, when we're talking about setting up our business for success, our business foundation for success, we should be thinking about, protecting our intellectual property, both where we're importing and exporting from. So and as you mentioned, I mean, a trademark is a few $100s. And so, if you have a problem with it, talk to us about that. Like, let's say the scary stuff, like what could happen if there is a problem? And I know in China, what can happen is they can prevent. It's the
same everywhere. It's the same everywhere. I think that, first of all, if you take your business seriously, your assumption should be that anybody can take your IP anywhere. And it doesn't matter if it's China or if you manufacture in Germany or France. I think you shouldn't rely on anyone. And when you have IP, you should protect it. So, we talked about trademarks, but you should also talk about patents and design patents. If you designed a product and you have a unique bottle, you want to protect that through a design patent in the US, but also where, in the country where you manufacture and other country you're going to sell in. So at the end, it doesn't really matter where. And to answer your question, when things go wrong, what happens is the following. If the hijacker has already registered the trademark, what you must do is file a kind of cancellation proceeding. That can take a year or two, depending on the country. The costs are the cost of a kind of mini litigation. So of course, usually above 10K, 20K, etc. Or you can buy the trademark from the hijacker and kind of surrender to the attack. We've seen that actually at Fortinet from when exiting. Sometimes they do that when you're in the middle of a transaction, and then you have no choice but to buy the trademark because you have a deal and you have no time. So the best is really to, at the end, it's usually not more than $1,000 and you're done with it when it comes to trademarks. And for patents, it's, kind of the same.
And maybe we can, you just brought up when you're selling your business, how important that intellectual property is. You sometimes can be cornered into having to spend that money. But if you have the proper contracts set up with your suppliers and you have protected your intellectual property, I'd love to ask Mikkel, what kind of valuations have you seen? What kind of increases have you seen, or better deals have you seen people get when they set up the proper business organization?
Yeah. So first, I'll start with saying that when someone runs an e-commerce business or an Amazon business, then basically it is comprised of two main things. One is the traffic and demand from the market, which is generated by many ways, but part of them, of course, is promoting your brand and product and listings on Amazon in this case. And the other side is to really supply good products to your client, to your consumers, to your clients. Without it, you don't have a solid business. At the end of the day, the virtual part of the business meets real life, and these are actual products that someone should enjoy from. So this goes, of course, with having a strong supply chain and strong suppliers. Suppliers are super important. They are part of the asset of the business. Part of the businesses do not have them as real assets. So you can see, let's say, the more risky businesses would rely on suppliers which are not as strategic to their business because they are not as committed to them. And this can be demonstrated by different bad behaviors, let's say. So which can be seen by poor supply, not meeting timelines, prices which can change from time to time, quality of the products can be not as good or not in accordance with the spec that was agreed with them, and other stuff. And as opposed to that, good suppliers can be real partners to the business. I'll get to an example in a minute, but just to explain, if you have a good supplier, such a supplier would support the product development, right? You need to develop more products. It's an ongoing developing business. So if you have the right supplier in place, this is your partner to develop your next product. Of course, the legal side, I will not repeat on everything that Yael explained, but this is the supplier that respects your legal rights, your intellectual property, and you can be safe with. And then of course, capacity, the supplier that you can grow with, that can put for your use the required capacity. And again, to respect prices that were agreed upon, to be liable in case that something did go wrong and there are claims by clients. Then if the supplier can back you up, that's super important. A supplier that is open to changes in your packaging, etc. I think that one very good example that I have in mind is of a business that we've sold for cables. And cables are relatively commodity. What is cable? It's like maybe the most common and almost no innovation in cables, right? In this specific business, by the way, the cables were differentiated a bit because they were in different colors. But at the end of the day, it's a cable, you know, you just stick it to some, to some computer on one end and to another, I don't know, device on the other end. But this business worked with the same supplier for many years, for 5 years in their case. This supplier was all the time up to, you know, very updated on the most recent cables that are coming into the market, and he afforded this business to develop their own colors for those cables. The relationship were amazing. They met face to face. This was a Chinese supplier, by the way, but doesn't matter. They met face to face in China and in the US, discussed future initiatives. And this is a huge asset because once the buyer comes and say, okay, I want to buy this business, if this relationship with the supplier are transferable and well established, then it's a great asset for the buyer, because the buyer knows that he can rely upon the continuous supply of the product. Maybe one more thing, very good relationship with supplier can also support the cash flow of the business, because then you can agree on better payment terms, and this way actually fuel your business with additional funds. So I like a lot what you're leading, Amy, here with putting a lot of attention on sourcing. And as we respect so much any seller that will join this event and look after sourcing in Mexico, of course, it's very important. I can talk a lot more, but okay.
I want to just touch on a few things that you mentioned. So first of all, you talked about, the importance of having a reliable supplier and having really great supplier relationships. And something that people should be aware of when they're moving from, for example, China to Mexico, is that relationships are very, very important in Latin American culture. Of course, they're important in China as well, but they're very important. A lot of people will contact us and say, why can't I just have your list of suppliers so I can just reach out to them? And we always tell them it's very important that, in Latin America, for you to meet in person and build those relationships. And the good news is, to have a meeting with your supplier in Asia, that's quite a flight. If you live in the United States, that's quite a lot. But if your supplier's in Mexico or Latin America, it's actually the same time zone in many cases. It's a very quick flight. And it's a lot easier to communicate in those ways. And because the culture in Mexico and Latin America is so relationship based and relationship forward, it really lends well to having a better supplier partnership, right? And making sure that you have that awesome partnership where you're able to build your business in a great way. So we've noticed from our first event, people that are already sourcing, they're just loving the relationships with their suppliers. And it's just a wonderful thing. Why do you think, and I'll put this question out to either of you, why do you think it's important for, and wait, before I get there, I wanted to mention one other thing. You talked about, Mikhail, you talked about, margin. You talked about getting that extra money in there, right? And the other benefit that we have in Mexico and Latin America, especially Mexico, is that we have that free trade. So we're seeing a ton of other countries like China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, actually setting up factories in Mexico so that they're able to take advantage of that free trade. Anything more than 70% made in Mexico is tariff free. So we had Branded at our last event, and they actually acquired a business that was mostly based sourcing in Mexico. And they were speaking about how they moved it was like a sports water bottle, kind of like this, right? From Amazon Accelerate, right? But they had this like sports water bottle kind of thing. And it was plastic injection molding, which of course Mexico is second in injection molding in the world, next to China. So that's really good to note that we can have plastic products made in Mexico. But they moved a product like this, and it had a cap, and the cap was kind of a little bit more fancy. It had like a handle on it, and then they had the bottle. And the per unit price, and everybody on the trip called this the money slide, because they were like, this is what we were here for, right? They broke down all the costs of what it cost them in China to make it and ship it, and, you know, landed costs, all of that, with tariffs, everything else. And then they broke down, after they made those molds in Mexico, the same cost, and the per unit cost was slightly higher in Mexico. The per unit cost to make it was slightly higher in Mexico, but overall they saved $2 per unit, because after they added in shipping and tariffs and everything else, you know, now they can get this product in 2 days, right? Because it's just ground transportation. There's no boat to put it on. There's no ship to ship it over 30 days over ocean freight, right? You're just literally putting it on a truck and sending it through a border where tons of trucks come through every day. Mexico has a really great supply of highways, everything like that. So when it comes to margins for your business, even though a supplier in Mexico might quote you higher per unit cost, ultimately you may be really saving. And when it comes to increased prices, and I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of, you see people trying to sell their businesses right now, and there's, you know, increased cost in advertising, and really margins are slim, especially with the shipping costs and everything that we went through during the pandemic. So margins really matter. And did you guys want to touch on that a bit?
Yes, so of course margin matters, because margin, you know, this is part of what sets how much profit you will generate with your business, and also the margin themselves, the level of profitability out of you know, the profit out of compared to the revenue is also very important, because this is what dictates or sets what is the level of the risk of the business. And as much as the profitability is higher, then you are less vulnerable to changes in the market, and you have more ability to respond and to enhance your business. I think, by the way, Amy, as you mentioned the short shipping time. This relates not only to cost. Of course, cost should be observed and examined carefully in each case, but there is another important angle to this, and this is time to market. Inventory planning is one of the most complicated missions that any e-commerce and any consumer good business is facing. And whenever you have a shorter time to market, then this mission becomes easier to accomplish, because the way to correct any mistake in the planning, which is part of life, because, you know, predicting what will be in the future is tough. We all predict what happened yesterday. Then the short time to market minimize the level of mistake. Potential mistake that you can do here, and then you can you are more less vulnerable or less exposed to loss of sales because of inventory shortage. So this is a huge advantage.
Yeah,
sure.
I'll add maybe about the tariffs, because that's a kind of topic nobody really likes to talk about. But you know, we've seen cases where at the end of the road, after the tariffs, there was no profit at all, or, you know, very, very low. And sometimes some sellers don't pay the full tariffs, or they don't even know they don't pay the full tariffs. And during an exit process, that's something that you can find out, because you start to get into your numbers. So in some cases, actually, Mexico is the answer, because when the tariff went up so much, that's something that buyers are starting to look at, and some of the sellers that we've been seeing.
I love how you said in some cases Mexico is the answer, because that's so true. A lot of people ask us about that. They say, well, you know, can I just move my whole supply chain from China to Mexico? And yes, theoretically you could. I mean, nearly everything that is made in China can also be made in Mexico. I mean, we at the multi-category trade show, we have metals, plastics, cut and sew, apparel, plush, wood products, office supplies, furniture, all the things, arty crafts, handcrafted things, patio and garden, pottery, ceramics, you name it, you can get it in Mexico and in Latin America. Even one of our speakers specializes in helping electronics companies move their supply chain from from China to Mexico, which is so interesting to me because I wouldn't think that Mexico would be super capable with electronics, but big companies like the hard drive company Seagate has completely moved their supply chain to Mexico. So tons of capability, but it's not going to be a perfect fit in every case. And when we're thinking about the value of our business and making sure that we're looking after that time to market and developing new products and the right partners, we need to do what makes economic sense and what makes sense for our customers, so that we can grow our business in the right way. So yes, you're going to be able to source a lot from Mexico, but should you replace your entire supply chain or diversify it completely from China to Mexico? Not necessarily, right? It might not always be a good fit. But should you check Mexico out? Yes, because there is so much capability that is there, and there's a lot of opportunity. And we've covered a lot of this today. I'd like to follow up with a question about diversifying the supply chain. Michal, you gave this really great example of how this cable manufacturer was a really good partner. But how important is it for people to have for sellers, of course, and brand owners to have multiple suppliers or different ideas of suppliers that they could utilize or call upon as their business grows?
That's a great question. Dependency upon a single supplier, that's a weakness, generally speaking. Of course, if you have great relationship, well proven for the long term, hopefully covered with an agreement. I don't know if this is something that you can practically obtain with the Mexican suppliers as opposed to Chinese supplier, that it's mostly a waste of time to even try. Then other than that, of course, you should better have more than one supplier. You should have some redundancy, some ability to, not to put all your eggs in one basket in this aspect. That's very important. Whether this should be different suppliers in different countries, yes or no, I don't know, not necessarily. I liked a lot your comment that this should be carefully examined on a case-by-case basis. This should be a diligent decision to be made by any business to replace suppliers, to move to Mexico. But again, if the opportunity is there and to diversify the suppliers this way too, then that's super important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the other thing that you mentioned was contracts, right? Setting up contracts with your suppliers is so important. And when it comes to legal aspects, people are always asking, well, what should I just do an NDA? And my answer is always, well, you should do what is legal in the country that you're sourcing from. So, if you're going to source from China and you expect to have solid contracts with your suppliers, then you probably shouldn't draw up an NDA in English using a free template from the internet and then expect your supplier to abide by that and expect that to get you anywhere in court in China, right? So the same goes for Mexico. Of course, there's the same law in Mexico when it comes to contracts. But let's talk a little bit about that. How important are having those written contracts with your suppliers and service providers even when it comes to sourcing from other countries? What are the considerations there?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that generally speaking, if you look at 10 sellers, 9 won't have a contract, and it's not that bad. I think that most sellers don't know that an email can be a contract. If you and I decide something, and we have a collaboration, and there's an email, and there's an invoice, and there's documentation supporting in 99% of the countries, that's binding. So the POs usually that kind of covers you on the legal side. But if you really want to get into the details and protect yourself, above the standard, then of course a contract is the right way to do it. And by the way, you asked earlier about how buyers are looking at it from a valuation perspective. Does IP and those contracts, do they push the valuation? I just wanted to mention about that. When we've done a survey about, I think it was last year, about a year ago, and we asked buyers about what increases the valuation. Almost nothing pushed the needle except for IP there. We asked, like, if they have a strong social media presence, would you offer a higher multiple? They said no. What about retail? Would that push the valuations? Not necessarily. And then when we got to IP, they said yes. So I think to answer that question that you asked earlier, IP can increase the valuation. Of course, the trademark is the most basic thing, and that does not increase the valuation. It's the minimum, and if you don't have it, you may not have a deal. But if you have patents, not only in Mexico, but generally, in the US, wherever you're selling and where you're manufacturing as well, that's something that they would look at, and that definitely strengthens your brand. So all those things are, if we're on the from an exit perspective, that's something they definitely look at.
But I love how it all ties together, right? It's the legal aspects of, setting these things up, but later on, it's what adds value to your business. And sorry, Mikhail, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so that's exactly your comment. So at the end of the day, any legal activity should serve the business. So it's not there is no legal aim that stands alone. It's all in the service of the business, and whatever is really good for the business, this will create value for the business altogether, and eventually it will pay off when the business will be sold. So I really want to mention that, of course, a trademark, as Yael mentioned, it's a must, because without them, you may not have a business at all, and you may not be able to sell it at all. But patents, I would look for patents that are really valuable, not just to say I have patents, but these are patents that really differentiate my business, really give me some, competitive edge over my competition.
Yeah, and that ties into what you talked about products being an asset. So your product development and your products being an asset, and products are only really an asset if you can protect them from being completely knocked off, because there will always be somebody bigger than you with more money and more resources. And if you have no ability to defend that, you have no ability to defend your products or your development of them, then you kind of get stuck. And that's why a buyer of a business would want to see that, because they would want to be able to carry that through and carry that protection through. So I love that. I really look forward to you guys joining us in Mexico, and for all of us to really understand what we can do in Mexico. So many opportunities, and so much that we can do to diversify our supply chain, to add value to our business, to shorten our lead times, to even lower our costs, but also maintain that quality that our customers are looking for. And it's something that all of us should be thinking about. We should all be thinking about diversifying our supply chain and what is happening in the future. So thank you, ladies, so much for being here with me today and for kind of discussing these aspects. And I look forward to learning more from you both on the trip and at Eva Latam. And I know that our folks will be also. So if you guys have questions here during the live, feel free to ask them, and we'll definitely follow up with some answers. And thank you all so much for being here. And thanks so much for tuning in to this week's show and our Mexico content here. And yeah, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their week, and we'll see you in Mexico.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.